Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast for this Tuesday, November 5th, 2024, Election Day 2024. We're going to take your mind off the election for a little bit of time today. Hopefully that's a welcome reprieve for many of you. And we are going to recap what we have been doing at Obesity Week so far, the sessions that we have been attending, and pulling out the information that is most important to those of you who are on the pen. So if you're just joining here for the first time, I know many of you I've met for the first time at Obesity Week this week. If you're just checking us out, thanks for being here. If you've been here for a while, thank you for being here, and thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. It's been a pleasure to get to meet some of our friends that we have made over the last couple of years at On the Pen. We've had the chance to meet Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, Dr. Mike Albert. We've had the chance to meet Dr. Beverly Chang. We've had the chance to meet many doctors who are just fans of the podcast, fans of the show. We've had the chance to meet Madison Muller and the Row team, including Z Ritano. So lots of On the Pen guests have had the chance to meet myself in person. And of course, I've had in tow with me my mother and my sister, who have been just a tremendous help. We've got some exclusive content that we are going to be bringing you in the coming weeks that I am extremely, extremely excited about. It's next level stuff. And this is what we've been looking for On the Pen. So everyone who has helped to support our trip down here and to help defray the cost of us being here, which hasn't been cheap, thank you, because you all have made this possible. This is literally the community. It's all about you, and we're doing this together, and I'm so very appreciative of each and every one of you. Now, I just want to this is going to be a little bit out of the norm for our normal podcast format, but I'm sure you can understand why. The first couple of weeks that we have spent here, first couple of days that we have spent here have been a little challenging to get our bearings. It has been quite a whirlwind. It's like drinking from a fire hose when you come to one of these. I've done industry trade shows many times in my previous career, and so I'm not foreign to how these things work. But when you're in a totally new industry like medicine, it's just another world. And so we've been trying to pin down the things that I feel would be most beneficial to the community. So I want to start by talking about the first night where Viking Therapeutics released poster data. So it's really interesting when you come down here. A normal trade show, if you've ever been to one, there's a trade show floor and exhibits from different vendors, et cetera, et cetera. What is unique about this show is there is a whole segment of the trade show floor that is devoted to these posters, and I have some of them posted at onthepen.com. I've dropped a couple articles there, so make sure you're following along at onthepen.com. But the first night, the most anticipated poster, I think, among the people who were attending the show was definitely one that was put up by Viking Therapeutics. We did a little video on this, so you can catch that one if you want to relive what it was like to get that in real time. But basically what we learned about from this specific poster was the GIP GLP-1 co-agonist candidate that Viking Therapeutics is putting forward, called VK2735. We, of course, refer to it as Viking Tide here at On the Pen. And they released some data specifically about their oral formulation. Now, the oral formulation of all of these obesity medications cannot be understated because of the potential value they bring to scalability. They don't require cold chain storage. They're much cheaper and easier to manufacture and scale. And so this was really exciting to get some of the data on the oral formulation of VK2735. It is the first oral formulation of a GLP-1 GIP coagonist. Of course, you have a similar coagonist situation with tirzepatide, but we don't have it in pill form. This one from Viking Therapeutics really has been pushing the boundaries of how much active pharmaceutical ingredient of this particular peptide can people tolerate. So it acts on similar hormones to tirzepatide, but in different ratios, and it's a different molecule. And so the study of the oral pill design was a phase 1 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial with 92 healthy adults. So this is a phase 1 trial, so it's smaller for starters, and only 92 people were in this. The design of this study was to test safety, tolerability, and weight loss efficacy. So the participants took daily doses of VK2735 in varying amounts over 28 days, which allowed researchers to gauge the appropriate dosing and potential efficacy of the oral formulation of this. And we'll get into the injectable formulation in just a minute. But the highest dose tested of this oral formulation, and to be clear, this is a peptide. This is not a small molecule drug. So peptides, what do we know as a community about oral peptides? They are very difficult to extract bioavailability from. Not sure I'm saying that right, but the bioavailability of an oral peptide is very low. So they really are cranking up the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, to see how much is tolerated. So 100 milligrams was the highest dose in this particular trial, which is very interesting because it's just kind of a staggeringly large number. What we saw at that specific dosage, again, this is over 28 days, was a remarkable reduction in weight. Patients lost 8.2% of their body weight in just 28 days on this oral formulation. Now, there has been some talk within this community, shout out to Matt, about the design of this trial and the patients that were potentially selected for this trial. But I don't think any of that is necessarily proven. I think it is very interesting and intriguing, regardless of what protocols they were on for diet or exercise, to show that much weight loss in a month from an oral formulation. Now, a lot of that's probably bound to be water weight, and it'll be interesting to see as this progresses to phase 2 if that weight loss clip is sustained and sort of what lifestyle modifications or interventions they inject into those, no pun intended, into those phase 2 trials. So 8.2, that was big news. Now, that night we saw a big pump in the Viking stock. The next day we saw the stock come back down to earth. And people are like, why did that happen? Why was that? Well, two things. There was some additional data dropped from AstraZeneca that we'll get into. But I really believe that once Wall Street kind of takes a look at this in a more serious way, the thing about Viking Therapeutics is they have to find a partner. They're not going to be able to scale the amount of API that it would require for people to be on 100 milligrams daily of this peptide. And if you doubt me, just look no further than oral semaglutide. Rybelsus has been tested at up to 50 milligrams and tested quite successfully. Novo Nordisk has not brought the oral version of 50 milligrams semaglutide to market yet, and I believe that's for two reasons. I think one of the reasons is there is the potential for it to sort of cannibalize some of their injectable, medications that they're selling. I think the main reason, however, is the fact that 50 milligrams daily of Rybelsus equates to about 350 milligrams of active pharmaceutical ingredient required per week to reach a similar efficacy to what 2.4 milligrams of the API does weekly for the injectable. So you just do the math there. It's like 170 times roughly the API required for semaglutide if you're going to take it orally in those quantities. So how Viking Therapeutics, without nearly the infrastructure that Novo Nordisk has, would be able to on their own manufacture all that API remains to be seen. So I think that is the reason that you saw the pullback in that Viking Therapeutics stock once that information kind of once we had 24 hours to sort of absorb that. Now, on the injectable side, there's equal amount of promise. Interestingly, the high dose tested in the injectable is 15 milligrams, so very similar to what we see with tirzepatide. Very interesting. This was a phase 2A trial with the injectable, and it was randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, enrolling 125 participants with patients requiring having a BMI greater than 30 or 27 plus a comorbidity, which seems to be about the benchmark required by insurance companies to cover. And participants were given a weekly injection of Viking Therapeutics 2735 or placebo, and then they escalated the doses to determine the most effective and tolerable levels. By the end of this 13-week study, so the oral study was a phase 1 study that lasted 28 days. This injectable study was a 13-week study, and patients on the upper dose of 15 milligrams lost up to 14% of their body weight in that time period, 13.1% when you take out what people lost on placebo, right? So 13.1% body weight when adjusted for placebo. And that is just a fantastic number when you think about how long it takes patients on average to get to those numbers with tirzepatide or semaglutide. So very, very interesting. There's also some interesting data baked in here about how long the medication stays in your system compared to tirzepatide, so maybe a little bit longer acting. Just some very interesting stuff from Viking Therapeutics. But again, it is hard to imagine any of these smaller pharmaceutical companies bringing a new medication, a new injectable or oral medication to market for obesity and competing with Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly in a meaningful way when it simply comes down to manufacturing capacity. And that sort of bleeds into some of the other news that's going on in the world of GLP-1s right now, like the Catalent acquisition by Novo Nordisk, where essentially Novo Nordisk would commandeer a good bit of Catalent's manufacturing capacity. If you don't know Catalent, just a brief flyover is that they're a generics manufacturer, and they honestly supply contract medications to Eli Lilly, to some of the other big ones, I believe Roche. A lot of the big pharmaceutical companies work with Catalent to help assist in the manufacturing of their medications. And now with Novo Nordisk having a deal on the table to potentially purchase Catalent, that throws a lot of this stuff into question. So you see, Eli Lilly is really building a ton of infrastructure. That has been their path forward. Novo Nordisk has been building some infrastructure, but this acquisition of Catalent is really a critical piece to not only continuing to meet demand for semaglutide or semaglutide, as they've said all throughout this conference. I'm sticking with semaglutide. I'm stubborn. But for CagriSema, which is the next medication to come to market. And we should potentially, the rumblings are that we may get some breaking news on CagriSema before this conference ends. So stay tuned. Make sure you're following the channel to stay in touch with any breaking news that happens in regards to CagriSema. Make sure that you hit the like button if you're enjoying this live stream. Now, that was Viking Therapeutics. The interesting thing about the Viking Therapeutics news, I told you there were kind of two things that were happening simultaneously to impact why the stock for Viking Therapeutics, why I believe anyway, as much as a guy on YouTube can hypothesize about this stuff. The very next day after this data was dropped from Viking Therapeutics, we had AstraZeneca come out and sort of steal the spotlight with their molecule, a molecule that they acquired from, I believe, a Chinese company. This molecule is called AZD 5004. I did a short video on TikTok or YouTube today. I believe it's at AOD, getting it confused with something else, but AZD AstraZeneca 5004. And it's their latest answer to a growing demand for effective and scalable obesity treatments, just like the oral version from Viking Therapeutics. This is a once daily oral GLP-1 receptor agonist, and it's showing some very interesting promise in phase 2. So just jumping to the results, they saw a 5.8% weight loss after 4 weeks of treatment in type 2 diabetes patients. So this was looking specifically at patients with type 2 diabetes. Being able to see that kind of weight loss from another small molecule oral, and the small molecules seem to be a bit more friendly to investors. Small molecules, first of all, they aren't as easily duplicated by compounders, so that's of course a big topic of conversation. So I think you may have seen, sort of a cooling down of the excitement of the Viking Therapeutics news by the fact that the next morning AstraZeneca released this information about AZD 5004, a small molecule GLP-1 pill. Now, also, there's a couple really interesting, promising things coming from AstraZeneca in the way of an injectable. So AZD 6234, gotta love these numbers, geez, is another promising candidate. It's a long-acting amylin analog. So you've seen CagriSema or cagrilintide, which has been developed by Novo Nordisk pharmacists, and a amylin agonist. You see Eli Lilly developing the same thing in what they call eloralintide, another long-acting amylin agonist. Both of these treatments from Novo and Lilly respectively are looking to be combined with existing therapies. Of course, CagriSema going to hit the market in 2026. We will likely see eloralintide advance through clinical studies over the next 3 to 4 years, and we'll see that ultimately probably combined with tirzepatide, perhaps even retatrutide. But for AstraZeneca's part, they are also looking at another injectable GLP-1 glucagon agonist. So it's a dual agonist like tirzepatide, but instead of doing GLP-1 and GIP, it's GLP-1 and glucagon like you have in retatrutide, and looking at combining the GLP-1 glucagon dual agonist with this amylin agonist to create basically a triple agonist, or what they're calling at AstraZeneca a triple mechanism, a combination designed to maximize weight loss while supporting organ health. Of course, we have seen some really good promise with retatrutide, of course, what I've heard all week, retatrutide, but retatrutide, of course, having that profound effect on MASH. I mean, you're seeing it even with tirzepatide, but to a greater extent, you're seeing it also with retatrutide. So very, very interesting stuff there. So I think, to make a long story short, I think what you ultimately saw was AstraZeneca stealing some of the thunder of of Viking Therapeutics. So very, very interesting stuff there. Now, I was able to sit in on a very interesting session yesterday morning. I did not get to the tirzepatide session in the afternoon, but by all accounts, I had other people that were there. There was no new news, but I do want to get into some of the interesting data that I was able to extract from a session I sat in on Novo Nordisk's Semaglutide Select trials. Now, we've of course gotten information from the Select trials a while back, but there was some really interesting drill down information in there that I think is worthy of bringing to our attention, because one of the interesting things about the Select trial that I was not aware of is that in the Select trial, welcome, by the way, I know a lot of you are commenting in the chat. I thank you for being here. Drop an N in the chat and let me know if you're new. But Ali, Karen, Neo, Downsized is in the house. How are we doing? Neb, Osvaldo, welcome. Thanks for being here. Michael, Stu the Dude, I see you all. Thank you for being here. I want to acknowledge that you're here. But moving through this Select trial data, one of the fascinating parts about this study is that all this great news that Select brought us, like the reduction in cardiovascular outcomes, patients weren't even required to escalate their dose. In fact, a pretty strong number of people, not a majority by any means, but a very strong number of people never even got to the 2.4 milligram dose of Wegovy. Some during this trial even paused their treatment of semaglutide, which is fascinating because it was not their goal. This is the longest trial of a GLP-1 to date. This is a 4-year trial for semaglutide, and patients, they wanted to keep them enrolled. So if a patient wasn't tolerating a dose escalation, they could go back to the dose they were on. They could reduce their dose. They could also pause treatment for a period of time if that was beneficial to keeping them on the treatment long term. they were also not required to dose all the way up to 2.4 milligrams. And I want to say it was around 80%. Do not quote me on that number. But I was going to say around 80% did get up to the 2.4 milligram dose. But of course, even higher doses have been tested. And the interesting takeaway is that the cardiovascular benefits shown from the SELECT trial were independent of the magnitude of weight that somebody lost. So if somebody lost a meaningful amount of weight, 5% or more of their body weight, it did not matter if they lost 15% or 5% of their body weight. The benefits, the cardiovascular benefits, the outcomes were improved regardless of the magnitude of weight, which does sort of hint at the idea that the molecule itself could be cardiac protective and not just dependent on the weight loss alone. That was one of the very interesting takeaways. The other thing is that during this 4-year study, patients maintained their weight loss. In other words, they hit their max weight loss and they maintained it for the duration of the study, regardless of the dose that they were on. The other thing that I found very interesting, sort of baked in here, was some more information around the thought of suicide and suicidal ideation. This has been one of those things that has sort of kind of crept in and out of the news. Of course, they were looking into this here and found nothing. They're looking for it in the EU. Part of me thinks that it's a way to at least delay maybe paying for as many scripts as people would benefit from. I don't know. I have my theories. But I do think that this is some interesting data, because they did look during the course of this 4-year trial at the psychiatric safety profile and found that the rates of suicide and self-injury in the SELECT trial were very statistically comparable, whether you were on semaglutide or placebo. And so it was, statistically about the same. And so that seems to indicate that from a mental health standpoint, that the outcomes are not worse for somebody taking semaglutide. And so that was just an interesting sort of piece of information. These are all, of course, the SELECT trial, to just kind of recap, was how we got that heart failure with preserved ejection fraction indication for patients with obesity who are on Medicare. And we are going to see the same thing. We're going to see the same thing for tirzepatide within about the next 4 or 5 months. Of course, by the end of the year, we learned that we will see a sleep apnea designation hit for tirzepatide in the United States, which should ultimately lead to some access to tirzepatide for obese patients with sleep apnea who are on Medicare. Of course, I can't mention Medicare and the backdoor access to tirzepatide without mentioning how wonderful I think it is that Lilly has the vials in a direct pay option, as it is against the law for patients to be on Medicare and benefit from a copay savings card. It is literally against the law. People are always asking me, well, why don't they do anything for patients that are on Medicare? Well, it's because the patient programs that they have are not legal to offer to people on Medicare, and that's not a pharma thing, that is a government thing. But this direct cash pay option sort of offers Medicare patients an ability to pay a similar price for the medication as to the price that people are paying for the medication when they have commercial insurance but do not have coverage for Zepbound. So I think that I still continue to think that Eli Lilly going around the PBMs is low-key one of the most interesting plays happening in pharma right now. Because I feel like it's very disruptive and has the potential to expand access in a more meaningful way. As we all know, the PBMs are an absolute leech on our healthcare system. And, it doesn't seem like there's a political appetite on either side, in all fairness, either side. Everybody talks a big game about how it seems like there are issues with the PBMs inflating costs on our total healthcare system, but no appetite to change it at all. And so that is what continues to be very frustrating. Now, I have a couple really exciting things to kind of tease for the next couple of days. We're here through tomorrow. We'll go back home. But I want to just let you know about something that's very exciting. We have a couple very special interviews lined up. I'm so excited to be bringing you those over the next few days. We've got a lot of editing to do, but we are going to be, so there's one particular thing that I sat in on at Obesity Week so far that was what I am the most excited about. So if you were to say, Dave, what are you the most excited about of all the things that you saw at Obesity Week? It would be this, and we tentatively will have an interview for you with the CEO of that company. And so I'm super excited to bring that to you. Just a little teaser. I'll let you guess in the comments if you think you can look through and see what do you think Dave would have been most excited about. I don't know if anybody, maybe some of you deep tracks folks will get it, but yeah, I am super excited to bring that to you. That is just kind of a housekeeping announcement. Of course, we've got articles up at On the Pen about some of the things we talked about here, so definitely go and check those out. Thank you for being here. Make sure you hit that like button before you go. If you're listening on the podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star rating and review. That is what helps other people see this. And listen, it's working. It has been very, very, very cool to be down here and to know that, like, many of the prescribing physicians out there are fans of OTP and sending their patients our way to learn more, to have more competent and confident conversations with their medical team. Of course, we can't sign off without thanking Roe, our sponsor of the podcast. They make this all happen. Without them, we would not be here. So thank you to Roe for being our sponsors for the podcast. And thank you for being the best part of what we do. Until next week, we'll catch you in the next one.